Hello, I'm Jeff Kramer, the author of Infinite Resources, and I'm here with Roger Carlson, the author of the Saving the World Before Breakfast series of books. And together we're saving the world before breakfast with Infinite Resources. And tonight is May the 11th, Mother's Day. And Roger, why don't you introduce our topic for tonight?
Yeah, the quick introduction of it is I call it drones and robots because things happening in the Russo-Ukrainian war, there's a lot of drones and they're just the flying things, but there's also they get on the ground for robots and on oil oil drilling rigs, they now have robots that are on the ocean floor doing things. They're tiny robots that can replace bees. So if we have any problems with bees for whatever environmental reason, we've got silicon backups.
Yeah,
So
so what is let's say so mechanical devices there are what is it, Mechanical Turk, and these amazing devices that were invented over 100 years ago. You could even say things like the spinning jenny and the Jacquard loom were all kind of precursors to programming and robotics,
mhm.
essentially repeating specific actions. And of course, industrial robots fall in that vein where you can show them a pattern and they just repeat the thing ad infinitum. So, what's different now about drones in the technology that we're seeing?
I'd say just the biggest difference is that it's uh, more of the same. They get to be more complex and they're moving into new areas. For instance, there was a movie, I think 20 years ago now, called Minority Report, and in that movie, uh, I think they were chasing the good guys and the bad guys are chasing each other in a car assembly plant or manufacturing plant. And that movie, they didn't have a fake scene there. They simply used a car fabrication center. So the robots were already quite good. It's a matter of, I mean, they could do a lot of things, but it's usually just one specific thing. It's like spot weld this one spot, spot weld this one spot, cut this one area, uh, glue this other spot, and hit it with a light for 15 seconds. And somebody set that up. Whereas uh, the more advanced robots, we're still a long way from commander data and things that been in fantasy and science fiction and the Turk, which is I think was a fake, I believe. It was
Yeah,
there's
there was
some
somebody
guy
underneath that was
inside,
working with it, but yeah.
but you're getting more and more complexity, and they can do more things, which you want to have if you're going to be like in space. Hey, if there's some problem with it, you just come out with another robot and get it later on, and then do any tune-ups you need. If it's a person and they get stuck somewhere with no air, and likewise oceanic things, you know, climbing up on topping trees, you could replace some of the more dangerous logging operations with robots. There's a lot of ways to go, and it's just a matter of having smarter circuits and learning how to program things.
Mhm. Um, yeah, so I think like well, I think of things like putting a plane on autopilot, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And they had some basic autopilot kind of technology back in the World War II area. And it's kind of interesting for when I say autopilot, maybe it's more like flight simulator stuff. Where I live here in central Alberta, it used to be the Commonwealth Air Training region. And so all through southern Alberta, there's old World War II sites where the, airfields and stuff. And at the one close to us here in Penhold, just south of Red Deer, they have a simulator, and it was run by, if I'm not mistaken, it had like air bellows. And basically, what they had, you'd be sitting in your desk and you'd have to pretend that you're flying a plane and
Yeah,
you'd
your
go through,
cockpit and
yeah. And so they would have like gauges and all this sort of stuff, almost like the early flight simulator video games. And you'd have your joystick control, and it would track you as you were flying on a map, and it
Mhm.
would like literally keep track of your altitude and all of these different things, different parameters that they wanted to measure, just to see if you understood the basics of flying and could do it, you know, just as a mental exercise, I guess, but with limited feedback. So I guess in some sense it would be like instrument flying or something like that. But it was
Mhm.
fascinating to see that they had this technology already back in World War II times. And now, of course, with GPS, I think they've actually got it to the point where if the pilots were incapacitated, the plane could actually land itself. I know years ago the autopilot would shut off at about 50 feet, but I think now they can take it right down to the landing if they need to.
Mhm. Well, just like with Teslas, you can you can get out, the car goes and parks itself,
Right.
you have your two beers, and then you step outside and say, car, come here, and the car comes up and can pick you up. There are robo taxis.
Yeah. So how does that work now? If you're drunk, can you just have your car drive you home? Is that legal in California?
I think it's still not legal if, because although the taxis, they don't they don't expect any of the customers to drive the taxi. It's say,
Right.
it's the address I want to go to. So presumably you could, uh, hopefully they would change the regulations. I'm
Well,
setting my car on full auto because I'm not capable of driving.
right. And that also begs the question then, would you get pulled over if the car is driving in a fully legal manner? So you shouldn't get pulled over, right? And unless there's like what, racial profile or something going on in Teslas.
If it's, well, if it's a computer police
Yeah.
police car, it won't be doing that. It'll be good.
Yeah. Well, some of the recent examples, and they've got all sorts of little shorts. So obviously, the Ukraine war, you've got aerial drones, you've got FPV drones, you've got the sea drones, you've got automated systems like the anti-aircraft systems, which are like 1950s technology. So that's kind of robotics, but it's also uh,
Mhm.
it's older technology where they're taking the radar signal and looking at the incoming Shahid drone or something, and then firing at it.
Mhm.
What else have we got? So recently, I've seen firefighting drones where they literally take a fire hose up to the 20th floor of a building or something and spray water into the window where the flames are coming out. I've also seen you talking about traffic and such. In China, they've got a system now where the drones are like enclosed in like street lamps or something like that. They have an enclosure. They can go and recharge there. And then, you could eliminate the traditional high speed chase just by having a whole bunch of drones that follow a car, and they can swap off and probably do it, well, much more safely than, say, a helicopter chase or certainly a land chase, and
Mhm.
possibly save some lives that way. And the other thing that I thought was kind of interesting with that Chinese system is you could be driving along and the drone would kind of come into your point of view and like indicate that you're supposed to pull over to the side and receive your ticket or something
Mhm.
like that, and then fly off and go and recharge again. One of the other neat technologies, I think it was, I can't remember if it was from a university in Holland or in the UK, but some students were designing a system where a drone would clamp onto high tension electric transmission wires and use the magnetic field from those wires to recharge. And it would take very little energy to do so, apparently. So lots
Yeah,
of really cool stuff happening in that. And so like with the FPV drones, we've still got people that are manhandling them. But one of the big issues with the U.S. military is do we keep people in the loop? If there's a decision to kill somebody, do we make it fully autonomous, or do we make sure that people are in the loop? And I think the rule in the U.S. military is they still want people in the loop to make those decisions.
yeah. Although I think in the war, most anything goes. In Eastern Europe, there now, people are doing things. They're putting their anti-personnel mines, which is also supposedly forbidden.
Mm.
They're fighting to death there. Hopefully, they will stop that before they get themselves into real serious trouble that would affect the whole rest of the world. Because that was the thing. It's like, yeah, with war, anything goes, and it could grow. It's like,
Yeah. Well, my understanding, I don't know if I've just read this in fiction or if it's actually a system that was in place, but the Russians supposedly had a system where if they were wiped out in a first strike with first nuclear strike by the Americans, they were supposed to have an automated system that would automatically launch a retaliatory strike without any human interference at all.
yeah, I think that story just came out. The An account of claiming that that was true. Now, there's been fiction about such things, and there was way in the 60s when the worries about nuclear were at a much higher level, even though there were fewer nuclear bombs. Now we've got more countries with bomb making capability or near capability, but people don't, they just got tired of it, apparently.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Well,
a
it's
doomsday
interesting.
device.
Yeah. Exactly, some sort of doomsday device. And I don't want to sidetrack too much on the nuclear war scenarios and stuff like that, but I mean that's ultimately is part of this discussion. But what I find interesting is that Russia has nukes. They could use them, but they haven't.
Mhm.
And they kept on early on. They were saying, "Oh well, if you cross this line, we're going to use nukes. If you cross this line, we're going to use nukes." But for whatever reason, I think President Xi and others have convinced Putin that it wouldn't be a good idea to use nukes. And also, I think if you listen to people like Peter Zian or Zion, uh, he says that early in the war, the CIA basically said to Putin, it's like, in case you're wanting to use nukes, this is all the locations you've been in the last X number of days. And they give the time and the meetings and what was discussed in the meetings and things like this. And it's like, we know where you are, and the first nuke that will be fired in response will be aimed at you. So that might have been a motivation for him to not use nukes in this war. I'm not sure.
I think the bigger one is that most of or I want to say Soviet Union, that's history. Most of Russia is to the east and north of Ukraine. So, with prevailing winds coming from the west, any nuclear weapons that they used would drop fallout largely on Russia. Not guaranteed. Like at Chernobyl went
Mm-hmm.
northwest, went over
Right.
Poland and then to Sweden. In fact, that's how it was detected. The Swedes said, "Hey, Poles, did you have a terrible accident in your reactor?" And the Poles said, "No, but we started detecting radiation at this time." And so it
Mm-hmm.
was earlier. They said, "Ah, okay, we found it later. So it came from the south. Sounds like Soviet Union."
Yeah.
And there's the whole movie and the books about it, the whole thing where they should have told their people what was going on, just stay indoors for a couple days, but the worst of it, instead, kids were out playing at recess. And,
Yeah.
that was, and that was uh, Gorbachev had tried to, I'm going to be good now. We're going to be
Yeah.
have openness. We'll have glasnost. And they said, same old, same old. And
Well, yeah, same old, but I'm just trying to think of another example. Um, you know, we have that same attitude here in the West in terms of cover your ass, right? And it's like, well, who's responsible? And while some you're trying to figure out who's responsible, things aren't being done that maybe should be done, or whatever the case might be.
yeah, like there's a, was it one of the cities near Detroit, and they were short on money, and so
Oh,
they had really bad water.
yeah, Flint, Michigan. Yeah,
There we go.
yeah,
So yeah,
and
people tend to put it off. And of course, there's another reason to have more robots and sensors.
yeah,
Actually, that leads to another thought: is if you have more sensors in your sewer system, you can watch to make sure that somebody isn't sending really a poisonous waste from some chemical plant or something.
yeah,
So you
yeah,
catch it before, and then that'd be an important thing because one of the environmental things, hey, save the world before breakfast, da, 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 is you want to reuse the the waste, which was done for millennia. 40 centuries of farmers in China, that the one author, King, I believe his name was, he wrote about it, and they were using the night soil. And it was
Mhm.
done in Europe and America too. And then somebody
Yeah,
said, well, some of the diseases will come back. So the uh, more modern China's, that's part of why they did the biogas thing,
yeah,
because that would that would kill off the bacteria. And so then you could use the night soil for growing things. But before that, that was uh, snail fever and some of the nasty things that would be in the water. Cholera, of course.
yeah. Well, and I mean, the other thing you can do with night soil too is just kind of pasteurize it or something, right? And then that'll kill all the microbes in it. So as long as you do it thoroughly.
Yeah, well, that leads to it's more expensive if you can, and then you
Sure.
yeah, get it get them good and dead. If, first biodigest, then pasteurize.
Yeah, yeah. You don't want to if you don't have the less amount that you need to heat, the better, right? So if you can deal with it in other ways first, and then deal with the waste afterwards. And I don't know if you've ever toured a wastewater treatment plant. I've been to the Red Deer wastewater treatment plant, and so they, of course, they one of the first steps that they have is they remove all the solids from the effluent, and then they put it through a digester, and then they have the aeration tanks and all that stuff. And yeah, it's a pretty smelly process, but most of the fiber and stuff gets eaten by the bacteria and taken out of the system. And anything that's solid just gets transported to the landfill. So there's no attempt to try to recover anything for fertilizer. And
That's
that's not a bad approach, I don't think.
no. Although it would be nice to process it one way or another. The ultimate thing is if you really wanted to be sure is you could cook it down possibly with small modular reactor energy, and that would you could make it into biochar,
Yeah,
which is the biochar is more alkaline. And composting, like you compost the leaves in your backyard, that makes a more acidic thing, which
right.
in an area that has, say, coniferous trees, that makes a soil that's very acidic. So you don't want to have more because then ultimately it starts killing off your lakes and whatnot. So you have some
Mhm.
biochar, and that'll get rid of things you don't have to put it in a waste thing. If you've made sure that they don't have any lead or mercury or something that's used to be in a lot of industrial things. It's like
Right.
another off the slightly off the topic here. We had our big fires in the LA area, and they're saying, "Hey, we just cleaned up on some of the properties. They just scraped it off, and there's still some lead." And
Mm,
then the thought was, "Wait a minute, maybe there was some lead and things from fires years ago
yeah,
and industrial processes." So, anyways, that would be another thing. Have your little
yeah.
drones flying around that can sense things, and so you don't
Well,
have to have the expense of people doing it. You could have a very detailed map of what these things are.
it was interesting. I was watching an interview with Bill Maher. He was being interviewed by somebody, and they asked him what scares you the most, and he said it's the stuff in the air after these fires. You know, all of these toxins. Well, you mentioned lead, but mercury vapor, and who knows what kind of carcinogenic, plastic products after being burned, these kinds of things. So you're going around, you're breathing this stuff in, even in small amounts. Who knows what it's doing to your system? Not to mention, we know that plastics themselves, like the microplastics and things, are endocrine disruptors too. A lot of them. So you're running this huge experiment in Los Angeles right now on the effects of industrialization and burning waste, I guess you could say.
Yeah, although there's been these experiments for millennia, it's just that there's more industry now, and fortunately, we have ways to deal with it. Like they're,
Yeah.
they're arguing about, they're not arguing, they're trying to research how are the ways to get the a lot of plastics that have the chlorine in them. Find a process where you can get the chlorine out. That would help a lot.
Hmm.
And there's a few things where you can actually recycle plastics. That's again,
Sure.
you've got some materials being used, so you have less that you have to pay the expensive tipping fee for the hazardous waste.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Anyway,
Um,
back
all right.
back to
Hey,
more
yeah, back to drones. Let's get back to the drones. So,
and positive things.
what do you think
Agriculture.
now? What do you think of the future? With the Tesla bots and several other companies are making human style robots, and the idea behind that is if you make a robot in the shape of a human, then it can do anything that a human can do essentially. But Tesla is being very careful in their approach in that they're basically making it underpowered human, so they can't. You could overpower it, and so it's not going to come in the middle of the night and strangle you or something.
Yeah, yeah. Reference the Roger Corman movies and the various other things.
Well, I'm sure that's got to be in the back of people's minds. It's like, okay, if we can teach robots to slice and dice tomatoes, what's to stop them from slicing and dicing us? And
Of course.
and we all know that the way things work now is the computer receives code over the internet, the Tesla receives wireless signals to update its code. So it'll be the same thing with robots. They're in your home. Somebody could hack the system, and who knows what they're going to do with it, right?
Okay. Collect 2 paranoia points, but you might be right.
Well, I don't want to be paranoid about it. I'm just trying to be realistic. These, science fiction exists partly, I think, for these thought experiments and to try to make systems that don't end up being dystopian. So
Yeah.
if we can come up with a way to prevent those things from ever happening, then all the better.
Yeah. Well, actually, going back to Czechoslovakia again, Rossum's Universal Robots,
Yes.
RUR, that
Yeah.
was a Czech, I want to say CPAC?
KPEC.
KPAC, okay.
Yeah.
And that was in the 20s. In a lot of ways, it was an allegory to the old conservative aristocrats or business versus the communists. And that in some ways, the robots were an allegory for the revolutions that people were trying to do in the 20s and 30s. And the Soviet Union had just come into play, and it was a scary thing. new thing. And of course, the robots rebelled and apparently wiped out all the people.
Yeah. It's interesting. I visited Czechoslovakia when it was still communist, way back in, geez, 1989. And I saw Karel Capek's grave. It was in Prague. It's one of the popular places that tourists go to.
Oh,
At the
okay.
time, I had no idea who he was, but I know who he is now. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I saw they did his play at Caltech here in Pasadena,
Yeah.
and they did a pretty good job of it. It was pretty scary.
Well, I mean that whole idea. It's interesting. When was it written? I've got the
Uh,
1920.
mhm.
So already at that point, long before integrated circuits existed, somebody was already thinking along these lines. It was like, wow, that's a lot of foresight there.
Yeah. Although to them it was like just another way for a magical thing, like
Right.
the the genie or somebody produces a talking thing, or like Metropolis, and
Hmm.
the robot and the lights flashed on and off, and pretty soon it
Yeah.
was this woman that looked just like the heroine of the movie.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
actually, there's a whole lot of technology developments in between, step by step, and we're still a long way from a robot that's going to do like, 1,000 things. Like people are very flexible. There's all the things that a robot could do. It's like, well, you want to catch a ball, well, you got to have a program for that, and it's washing dishes. Well, it's got to be sure it's waterproof
Yeah.
hands so it can do that, and decide how big it is, and it's got to be strong enough to lift the dishes, but not crash them into pieces.
Sure.
And that's more programming.
Well, and it's amazing. Like we do all these things intuitively, and yet you have to literally program them for robots. But on the upside is once you have programmed a robot to be like the universal dishwasher, that program can then be transferred, and they can learn at an incredible speed, and so that's a huge benefit. I'm just curious, have you how many of the Asimov robot stories have you read over your life?
I think I only read a few short stories from the Caves of Steel or something like
Yeah.
that. So I didn't read the whole thing, although people have talked about it. So,
Caves of Steel it was a full novel, so I wouldn't call that a short story. But yeah,
it was, I think it was short stories that then were put together
oh, I see.
into,
Okay,
and I think the other books as well.
yeah, R. Daniel Oliva and Giscard, the robots in the Caves of Steel there. Um, I've read, I think, most of his everything like the iRobots and the robot short stories, and going to what's he's got one that's Robots in Earth or something like that. So basically, he ties together all of his different series from Foundation and the robot series and the Stars Like Dust and other books like that,
Mhm.
the galaxy development kind of stories, and kind of gives them one huge arc.
Yeah, the robots meet the people eventually. Foundation's Edge, maybe.
Yeah, well,
20 or
in
30 years
basically,
after his original book, then he
yeah,
finally had robots meeting
yeah.
people.
I think it's Robots in Earth or something, and it's Harry Seldon is being guided by R. Daniel Oliva there. Not
Mhm.
to give away the plot for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, but in the book, instead of being R. Daniel Oliva, he refers to himself as human or something like this.
Mhm.
So, of course, he's not, and that's kind of the play on words
Mhm.
there. So,
Yeah, so as a practical matter, it is a ways off. Although, was it the a computer with AI did pass the Turing test just in the last
yes.
couple of weeks.
Well, I've heard that AI now, uh, at least one of them has an IQ of at least 130, and so that puts it well above the average of human intelligence.
Mhm.
So yeah, and passing the Turing test, I think that's, you know, technically earlier versions of Chat GPT could have done that. Um, but the question is, are your answers too robotic, or like how, can you lie? Are you able to fake human lack of knowledge? At what point are you a believable non-human, or a non-human behaving like a believable human, I guess.
Yeah. Anyway, I was thinking we could put that for future for future thoughts thing, but for right now, hmm, uh, peach picking robots and hoeing robots and planting robots,
Yeah,
and we already have some of that. And if we're going to have like vertical farms, as of other than making greens, which are a little easier to
yeah.
get, but it's if you want to have as much robotics as possible, so that one guy can switch on machines and do the job, and he only calls the fix-it crew if they're needed. It's
Yeah.
because it's very expensive to run all this stuff. But
I,
it's
I'd imagine you've seen things like the trees that collect or the machines that collect almonds from trees and stuff like that, where they basically go out and they grab the stem of the tree and then shake it like it's like they're trying to kill it or something, and all the almonds fall off of it.
yeah, I've heard of that, and
And that's the same kind of technology that they use for a lot of different things. And then with blueberries, they have like robots that go in and have these little fingers, and then they same sort of thing. They just shake them really vigorously, but more gently, so it doesn't destroy the blueberry bushes. And then they just have like a tarp that goes underneath and collects everything and sucks them up, and then sorts and gets rid of the twigs and all that stuff.
yeah, there's a whole bunch of things, and picking fruit, finding it something that's just the right ripeness.
Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating. I toured. There's a company here, Sunterra greenhouses, and I was able to tour their greenhouse, and they grow in that facility. They grow strawberries and tomatoes, and the way that they grow the tomatoes, of course, certain varieties of tomatoes grow almost like trees, and they start them out and they just grow and they bud, and you end up having this nice little branch of 10 tomatoes or something on it, and then they just snip it off when they get to the appropriate ripeness. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then with the strawberries, of course, you've got the capability of determining what's the best time to pick them for ripeness, so that they don't spoil and they've got a decent shelf life and all those sorts of things. So pretty cool technology. There was a fellow here at Olds. We have an agricultural college in a relatively small city called Olds, halfway between Red Deer and Calgary. And there was a young guy there several years ago, and he was thinking, well, what can we do with the mash from the brewing program? And so they have
Yeah.
all this waste, barley and stuff.
Well, that
And so
shouldn't be anything new. That's called distilled dry goods. They've been selling that for like a century or more.
well,
It's good animal feed.
yeah, yeah, true. What they're doing instead is growing mushrooms from it,
Oh, okay.
and then they can actually feed the leftovers to the animals still. So they're getting an extra cycle of money making out of that. But what he's done, he managed to get some backing and some financing and stuff, and they're able to use artificial intelligence. So you grow all of these mushrooms in shipping containers, and of course they can grow in the dark, so that's not a problem. But when it comes time to harvest, you go in, send your robot in, and it will look at the different sprouting bodies of the mushrooms and say, okay, that one's ready to pick, that one's ready to pick, and
Mhm.
it'll actually go and pick them at the right time. Because certain, like some mushrooms, you can just harvest them all at once, but other ones they grow at different rates, and so you want to get them at just the right point. And if you apparently it's a um, very critical time sensitive thing. Like there's a 4 hour window, and if you can pick them at that time, they will last for like a week. But if you miss it, then they'll go bad in a day or two.
All right.
So, so the artificial intelligence programs that they have for that are pretty interesting.
Okay. And at the other end, I've been waiting for it to be there. They propose that there's a an instrument that they'll they'll sell, and you can go into the grocery store and like look at a tomato and see was this really ripe or was there a lot of ethylene in there that made it
Exactly.
look red and it's still going to taste like plastic. And you'd have the vitamin levels, the mineral levels, because the gripe has been that soils are kind of depleted in a lot of minerals and things, and
Yeah,
they get their nitrate, their phosphate, so that the plants will grow, but they're low in certain minerals and whatnot. Well, this would take it, okay, this one has the right nutrients, it
yeah,
has more vitamins, it has more minerals, so I'll pay more for this. Whereas this one
right.
is pretty much depleted. That should be cheaper.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting you mentioned that because it's the same thing going back to the mushrooms. So one of the types of mushrooms that they looked at growing was the reishi mushrooms. And I don't know if you're familiar with them, but when they grow in the wild, they have some anti-aging properties. But if you grow them in a farmed variety, they don't have that. You have to like add them in there. Other ones have like omega fatty acids and stuff like that. And if you don't give them the right substrate, then they don't produce that in the fruit. So farming mushrooms might not be give you the same health benefits as growing getting them from the wild
Mhm.
for the same reasons you were just describing. So garbage in, garbage out, I guess, is a way of looking at it.
Well, hopefully, in this case, it would be proper nutrients in. So
Yeah.
you can
Well,
check the nutrients going in.
I mean, mushrooms are famous for being grown on things like horse manure. So it's like,
Yes.
I don't know. Let's try check that manure for nutrition value here.
Yeah. I'm a mushroom. They cover me in horse manure and keep me in the dark.
Exactly. Well, and that also begs the question then too, like you know, are there antibiotics in that manure, and how much of that is going to be absorbed by the mushroom and passed on? And so there's yeah a lot of fascinating stuff in terms of agriculture and the science and health and longevity and all these wonderful topics.
Yeah. And the people they're hoping to do it. This goes back to agricultural issues where they say we have your vertical farms, and of course mushrooms would fit right in. It's to have another room that's
Yeah,
dark and moist
yeah,
and sealed off because fungi are particularly susceptible to other fungi uh,
yeah. So you
messing
filter
up
the
the
air going
production.
in there. Yeah,
But the thought is they say, well, hey, it's more work or more robotics or both. But if we could have it right there, like there are some grocery stores that have a vertical farm right overhead. So just take
yeah,
it right down. It's picked. It really is picked that day. There's no
yeah.
trucks. It's no waiting in the warehouse for a day. It's they just got it this morning.
Yeah, and that's the vision. Like I'm working with a couple of people who are developing greenhouse technology, and when you think about where we're getting our salads from in the winter, if they're not grown locally in a greenhouse, it means that they're coming from Arizona, California, Mexico,
Or
and then
Chile,
being,
Chile
yeah,
or Peru. I've seen blueberries from Peru,
yeah,
or blueberries and grapes from Chile.
and so going back to what you were saying about the ethylene and all that stuff. So obviously, if you got a head of romaine lettuce that's been picked in Imperial Valley in California, and it's
Mhm.
packaged and then shipped up to Canada. So you got probably 2 to 3 days on the road, and if you're lucky, you got it within like 4 days or 5 days.
Mhm.
Um, so that's 5 days less shelf life that it has.
Yeah, that's a John Steinbeck's East of Eden was talking about one of the first in the story. The guy had his crop. He sends it to the East Coast, but the train got shunted to the siding for a problem, and he
Yeah,
lost most of his
lost a little
money
crop.
because of
Yeah,
that.
that's.
It's,
I
it's,
remember
like,
seeing that in the movie. Yeah,
mhm.
yeah, pretty awful. Anyway,
So it's
um,
that's the only way you invent things is you take your chances, and if you make it work, you can make a fortune, you, but you've got to take the chance. You might lose, and it's the same way with that. They're doing better. Of course, speaking of which, do they have like regular greenhouses with just heaters, or do they have like exotic, like Chinese greenhouses with a wall that they're built, wall on the north side to keep as much
well,
uh,
I noticed the other day when I was picking up some cucumbers that they were grown from Blue Marble, which is one of the large greenhouses down in the Lethbridge area. I think that they're just using natural gas for heating in the wintertime.
well,
And
that's waste. The Chinese didn't invent Chinese greenhouses, but they worked on them a lot in the northern part of the country where it's cold, fairly cold country. Typically, they have a big berm, so it's like maybe they cut out some of the ground, and
yeah,
so you're built up against it might be a brick wall or something. So the sun, when the winter sun comes in and it hits that wall, so that keeps a fair amount of moisture.
hmm,
And then, of course, they got cheap. They said, heck with this glass. That's expensive. And if hailstorm comes through, it's just plastic.
yeah,
And so if hail comes through, well, dang, we have to replace our plastic.
right,
But it's but it's a lot easier. You don't have broken glass to fight with and so on. And
yeah, yeah. My father made like he lived out in the lower mainland of BC, so close to Vancouver in Abbotsford, and in his backyard he just had a hoop greenhouse.
mhm.
It wasn't enough to grow year round, but it gave him a couple of months of extra time in the spring and the fall. So
Yeah, that's amazing. The hoop houses in the Central Valley of California, it's much warmer country, but especially if they're near the coast where there's cool air coming in, cools it down. Hoop houses so that
yeah,
every time I go there, it might be several years before I go up to the Central Valley, and they go, hey, more hoop houses. They're everywhere.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, it's interesting stuff. But yeah, so now we got drones for warfare, we got drones for firefighting, we got drones for potentially for being traffic cops. Of course, we got security cameras in the UK on every corner and other places as well. I've got a security system right here at our house too. So everything is being watched. It's kind of interesting. Some of our neighbors here. They'll watch their video from the night before someone does something suspicious and they'll post them on Facebook. It's like, anybody know who this guy is? This sort of
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, we've got that. The ring cameras where somebody came into our backyard. Here's their
Yeah,
picture. So that's coming. It's not necessarily a full robot. It's just a remote camera.
yeah,
But the robot would get more, yeah, gets more exotic. It's like there's somebody moving. It's a person, and then it could call you,
yeah.
just like it calls. Your house is on fire. It was
Right.
the
Yeah.
lady I interviewed in
Well,
Palisades. She could see her house burning.
yeah. Well, and the thing about these security systems, like you say, they're intelligent enough to contact you in case something strange is going on.
Mhm.
They're intelligent enough to say, oh, this is of interest. These are the things of interest that happened last night. So here's a skunk that walked by, and these sorts of stuff. And so that's all built into the software, and so you can search through it. It saves you all the time for having to
Mhm.
manually watch the entire 8 hours or something like that, right? So there's a lot of built-in intelligence in that, and so then we're getting into smart homes, and our will our homes be robots as well? I haven't got. I don't know if I'd ever spent the money for one of these smart fridges, but in some ways it could be appealing. It's like, oh, okay, so this is the food that you have. This is the stuff that's going to be going bad in the next few days. Um, this is what you can make with it if you don't know what you want to have for dinner. And so, or if you want to make some special meal, you need to go out and get these ingredients, that sort of stuff. It'd be kind of neat to have a house inventory. And then if you got that kind of technology, then you just get your home robot to make the meal for you too.
That's right. And that's the thing, we haven't got to it because it was the 70s they first started talking about those things. And said, well, our smart refrigerator, how much is it going to cost? Well, about $20,000. I said, well,
Yeah.
how about a little whiteboard and a
Yeah,
magic
exactly.
marker? And I look in the refrigerator and then alert the new thing. Cell phone, take a picture of the notes on the,
Yeah.
so I don't have to take my whiteboard with me to the grocery store or my little post-it note.
Yeah, well, and this is like if you have an organized pantry, you just kind of do a little video of the pantry, and it says, "Oh, these are all the things that you have in the pantry," and like you say, you can do the same thing in the fridge and keep track of things that way. But I could see a time where they're integrating your purchases from the grocery stores, stuff that's being delivered to your home, what you got in the fridge, and you can update it manually or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, those kinds of technology could save a lot of wastage.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how many times does it happen to you? I know it happens to us all the time, where it's like, oh, I wanted to make that, and I totally forgot we even had it, and uh,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's gone bad or something, right? So
Yeah. They say about a quarter of the food is is lost in the developed countries. Of course, also because it has to be a perfect apple, a perfect pear.
well, exactly. Yeah. But if the industry's good, you can always take those imperfect ones and can them or something. I'm not sure what
Mhm.
happened just now, but your audio all of a sudden kicked up a notch.
Oh,
So you sound a lot louder than you did a moment ago. But anyway, no big deal. I don't think it'll be a problem. It's not like it's obnoxiously loud.
okay.
So
Yeah, that's where we need a robotic sound engineer. So
there you
just
go.
twiddle the knob back, the gain back down. Anyways, I would say we get to the kind of your area where you want to have something industrial energy out in the out of the Arctic. Now that's where what kind of robots would you want to
Yeah.
have for there?
Well, and so one of the things, I mean, obviously the Arctic is sparsely populated, and for good reason. Nobody, I mean, few people, I should say, in their right minds would want to live in a place where it could be minus 60 degrees. What's that saying in Antarctica? It's like the only thing that'll kill you in Antarctica is Antarctica.
Yeah,
So,
no
um,
polar bears there.
yeah, you don't have to worry about polar bears. The penguins are pretty friendly, but just step outside and you might die. So,
Hmm.
but if we got the potential to generate energy from that and produce, clean drinking water and other stuff just from the temperature difference between the atmosphere and the ocean,
Hmm.
um, how do we make sure that system works? And of course, you
Hmm.
could put people up there, but the cost of doing so is the major cost of operating a system like that. How about if we can replace those people with robots that are remotely operated. And of course, this technology is nothing new.
Mhm.
I think I heard about the first remotely performed surgical operations during the Iraq War, the first Iraq War.
Mhm.
Um, and you'd have a doctor in Bethesda or something operating via satellite on somebody in the field in Iraq, and the lag time isn't especially huge, and they've got the robot so that everything is controlled, and there's a little bit of delay, and so if the doctor has a herky jerky moment, that doesn't get necessarily transmitted, but all the fine motor skills can be replicated, and they've
Mhm.
successfully performed operations on literally on the other side of the world. So
Yeah, that's been talked about it, and that is coming, particularly important for, as you say, a place with a thinner population. I
yeah.
come from South Dakota, originally where I grew up, and similar thing. There's very few doctors when you get out into the ranch country, or you might have you might go, 10 or 15 miles between towns, and even a town might not have any
Mhm.
doctors. You might have to go, you know, 40 or 50 miles to get a medical clinic and serious surgery. Then you go to major towns. Well, if you get a lot of the things done remotely and or full bore robotic doing things, there'd be a doctor supervising, but it would still be mostly the machine work. The doctor isn't going to be tired because the machine can go all day. Just another doctor comes and sits down at the display and keeps watching it and makes an adjustment here and there.
Yeah. No, it really is amazing technology. Well, and then the next level after that, we were just talking about how intelligent artificial intelligence is getting. And if you have an AI watching doctors perform, I don't know, polyp removal from your colon or something like that, and it's watched hundreds of surgeries, and it knows the latest. It's able
Hmm.
to read the latest surgical digest, and thousands of articles are coming out every day in medical medicine. Um, so it wouldn't take too long in a scenario like that where you've got a supercomputer, um, that the surgeries performed by an AI could be more advanced than what the human surgeon could do, and you know potentially, like, I mean, humans have two hands to work with. What, imagine if you have an AI that can operate with 10 instruments in the same area or something like this, right?
Hmm.
And so now, uh, instead of just clamping it such and such a way, you can actually innovate and get into an optimal position for healing, or who knows what, and
Yeah.
before you put the sutures in.
Or in a dental office where there's a dentist doing things and it might be an assistant holding the suction to take the water out
Right.
that's building up.
Yeah.
So that's another one.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny you mentioned that, because in the book I talk about a dentist maybe in Australia who's looking to make a few extra bucks. He can operate in New York City via one of these things, and perform surgeries at 2 a.m. in New York or something, right? When the New York dentists are all going to bed, he can be using the same facilities for patients who are willing to come in at odd hours.
Yeah, that's true. Because yeah, you'd have the facilities going 24/7 instead of just like maybe 12 hours a day when they start at 5 in the morning and then they quit at 5. Everybody goes home
Yeah, exactly.
unless it's a serious thing. So yeah, that's another one.
Yeah. So, um, one of the things that I wrote about too is, so maybe you have one of these polar energy platforms. I
Hmm.
suggest that you know, in the worst case scenario, let's imagine how much it would cost to build a 1 gigawatt solar energy or polar energy platform, like I described in the book. And that's
Hmm.
basically, just for anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's taking the heat energy of the ocean and running a vapor power cycle to condense that in
Hmm.
the air and generating electricity from the pressure difference of the gas. Anyway, the amount of energy you can get is only limited by the size of your heat exchangers in the atmosphere and the
Hmm.
ocean. And so I said, in a worst case scenario, let's take the most expensive drilling platform that was designed to work in the Arctic conditions, and estimates put that at about $12 billion. I said, well, let's put 50% on top of that, and we'll make it $18 billion, and then we'll put $2 billion of
Hmm.
contingency. So it costs $20 billion. Well, if you do the math, 20 billion for a 1 gigawatt plant works out to something like $2,000 per kilowatt, right? And so then that's outrageously expensive, or 20,000. Um, but if we can take that same technology and mass produce those polar energy platforms, so instead of being a one-off design, you're reusing that design and making lots of them. Well, anytime you mass produce a process, the difference in cost between prototype and mass produced component can easily drop 10 to 1. So we
Hmm.
can drop that down a factor of 10, and now you're looking at $2,000 per kilowatt. And if you take that to the next step and you get humans out of the loop almost entirely, you might have one plant that's got humans on it, but maybe you have 50 plants that don't, and they're just being run remotely or
Hmm.
stuff. Getting humans out of the loop saves you another factor of 10, because you don't have to have all of the equipment up there and feed them and house them and entertain them when they're off duty. So you could drop that price now down to about $200 per kilowatt hour, and all of a sudden you're looking at, that's the least expensive form of energy you can get compared to anything at this point, basically.
Yeah. Or the same argument says with small modular reactors. You
Right.
can have a much smaller facility, but it's at a regular size factory. The modules are put on a truck. It's just some assembly, or it's small enough to even the whole thing
Yeah.
goes on the
Well,
back of an 18
I
wheeler.
I love that technology because in the Arctic, the waste heat from that small modular reactor then becomes a booster to the cycle that I'm talking about. And so they work very harmoniously together. And instead of getting one power cycle out of the small modular reactor, you end up getting two power cycles out of it.
Hmm. Or
So
even three if you're really
yeah, you
pushing it to
can exactly, you can modify it to do three if you wanted to.
topping cycle, regular cycle, and bottoming cycle.
Exactly. So
And again, you'd have some, at least cut your crew size down. And
yeah.
especially if you'd have a robot that would check your pipes going into cold water.
Hmm.
Uh, a diver with a heated suit is that's an expensive operation. You usually want to have two divers so you can have the other diver checking over that person.
Absolutely. You want to, especially in the Arctic, you want to have somebody looking after you, because if you run into trouble, you need to have somebody reporting back. Or if a polar bear comes and sneaks up on you, you want to have somebody to shoot it, right?
Exactly so. And they
Hopefully,
do come sneaking up.
absolutely, yeah. So even better yet, you have your robots checking the horizon constantly, and you'd be able to trust them better than the typical person, I think. I'm. Are you familiar with a company called Anduril?
How's it spelled?
It's named after, I think, a sword from The Lord of the Rings or something like that. Anduril, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken. Let
Okay.
me just pull it up here. Um, so recently, there was an episode of Peter Diamandis's podcast. Just a second, let me pull it up here. Library. There we go. Moonshots with Peter Diamandis here, and Palmer Luckey um, is the name of the guy who started it. He he was the guy who came up with a specific type of virtual reality technology, and that got bought by Mark Zuckerberg at Meta,
Hmm.
and he made like more than $1 billion in the sale of his company. And eventually, like he was working with Meta, and then eventually he got fired. So he said, "Well, what do I do with my money and my time?" And he figured he would go into developing defense weapons, defense systems.
Yeah, because they
And
pay well.
yeah, well, but he also figures, there's a significant threat from China, and when you consider the technology we're talking about, well, we've seen with Ukraine that drones provide an asymmetric benefit. You get a $1,500 drone can take out a $15 million tank, right? Or
Hmm.
um, and so uh, the economics of warfare become untenable if you're getting those kinds of losses. And or maybe it's three $500 drones, right? So,
Hmm.
but the point is that 1,000 to 1 cost ratio is pretty significant and hard to bear in the long run. And Russia's tanks now, I mean, they're going way back. I think they're certainly using like the 1950s technology on the battlefield now. They've run out of APCs in a lot of cases, so they're running people in on motorcycles and civilian vehicles to the front lines. It's really become quite desperate, I think, on the Eastern Front.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, the now the bad thing about war, the the Russians have copied a lot of things and added their own ideas. I think the
Yeah,
Russians were the first to use uh, fiber optic
yeah,
lines.
yeah. That's
Now you're talking about 10 kilometers distance. If they don't get tangled up in some brush or something,
yeah.
so yeah, 10 miles away, you could hit a tank or a person.
The concept's very similar to the technology NATO had back in the 80s, I think, or even earlier, possibly. Uh, Tow weapons. You've heard of the tow missile,
Hmm.
and it literally would carry a metal line, like a copper cable, so
Hmm.
that it could be remotely controlled to its target. Um,
Yeah.
so you could, as it's flying to its target, it could be updating, and so it doesn't
Yeah.
miss. So
Yeah. The only
that
problem with it
technology,
is that the guy in the tank who's seeing where it's coming from and he's going to be shooting. So the guy
well,
operating the tow is in danger.
that's true. Yeah, I mean, you can see the direction that it's coming from, but that's true of any missile launch system, right?
Well,
So
if it's autonomous, you just point at it, it knows where it's going, and then you fire and forget is the term they use in the military.
yeah, okay, fair enough. But I mean, where you firing it from will be exposed when you launch it, right?
Yeah, but only when you launch it. You don't have to be like with the tow, which is now 20 or 30 years old technology now. It's ancient history.
Yeah,
The operator is there guiding it, and he's in a line of sight.
yeah,
Actually, one of the things with the Ukraine war is all these hobby kits. You have a little, you're over the hill, but your drone are kind of over the hill. You got to have some line of sight for radio, but you're not looking directly at the tank. You're looking at the picture
yeah.
or the APC or the guy running across the field. Hmm.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, a lot of those systems like the Javelin and stuff now are the fire and forget type stuff. So of course the tows aren't being used as much, but I think they are still being used in Ukraine because NATO is giving them, essentially what we consider obsolete
Hmm.
equipment, but for them it's more than good enough to take on the equivalent Soviet era equipment. So
Yeah, and these things upgrade. Like there's something where there's Sidewinder, you know, 9M or something.
yeah.
The Sidewinders came out in 1954, but now for 70 years they've been evolving.
Yeah, the
And
Sidewinder
speaking of
missiles.
robots,
Yeah,
getting
that's
more competent.
that is pretty amazing technology, especially considering when it was developed. I saw one of my favorite podcasts. I can't remember which one it was at the moment, but one that I watch regularly had a really good in-depth description of how it worked and how the Russians were able to copy it because one of the missiles in the Korean War ended up hitting a Russian MiG, but it didn't explode, and so they had basically this intact missile that they were able to take apart and look at it.
A
And
very
so
nervous pilot that brought it back. Yeah.
yeah, right. Uh, TOW missile, the TOW stands for tube launched, optically tracked, wire guided.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, and again, so it's 1970s technology. So we're looking at almost 50 years now.
Hmm. Yeah. Time flies. Anyway,
For sure. Any final thoughts here? I guess we're coming up on an hour or so here.
yeah, I guess we just say it's like, gotta say it's coming in a bigger way for good and ill. You do your farming, you do your fixing something in the deep sea. Uh, you can have uh, rednecks pulling putting your drill tube together, or maybe some helpers. They're doing it.
You mean roughnecks, not
Roughnecks. There we go.
rednecks.
I knew something was wrong with that. Anyway, so they get used to using it, and the workers generally do pretty good,
Oh, yeah.
depending on if they get paid enough. Like there was one guy, he built robots, and they gave up on using them in Mexico because they had the hidden camera because the robots were breaking down. Well, they found out at night when the plant was shut down, guys came in with ball bats to beat up the robots, just like Ned Ludd. It was Ned
Yeah.
Garcia in this case.
The Luddites, yeah.
Mhm.
Sabotage. You know
Mhm.
what sabotage means?
That's it's they shoe their through their shoes, their sabots into
Yeah,
the machinery.
yeah. Into those wonderful knitting machines that I mentioned earlier, the jacquard looms.
Hmm. Yeah, and that was even before Jacquards, but yeah, same deal. But eventually, we get to it's just got to be the designers and the repair people that make things work. But as it turns out, it always ends up being there's more repair people and more designers still looking for workers. So it's not as bad as was it Player Piano, where it was one of the Kurt Vonnegut was a science fiction writer, and it was like most of the workers had no jobs. And that was the great fear after World War II, but it never happened. There
We
are
have a
some
great
pluses.
capacity for inventing jobs for ourselves. I mean, who would have predicted, say, the computer video games industry in the 1920s?
Yeah, yeah. I know a guy who who invented a Roblox game, Slippery Slope, where you have to go up the mountainside, and he's a guy. I think he's about in his early 20s, so he's doing pretty well apparently on it.
Yeah,
You have to buy the special shoes, of course, remotely.
yeah. It's kind of funny. My son, when I ask him what he wants to do for a living, when my son and daughter both wanted to be, well, my daughter especially wanted to be a paleontologist when she was like 4 years old because we took her out to Drumheller,
Mhm.
but to the museum out there. But my son, his ambition is to become a YouTube influencer.
All right, there are people that make millions of dollars a year doing that.
Yeah, some people do great at it. And I mean, look at you and I here. We're talking and posting this stuff to YouTube. Not that we've influenced many people at this point, but you never know. But yeah, I mean, again, YouTube influencer is a job that didn't exist, well, certainly 20 years ago. So,
Hmm.
so here we
Yeah, yeah. I think 20 years ago was the guy who said, "Here we're at the zoo. There's the elephant," and that was the first YouTube.
Well, yeah, I remember one of the first things that I watched on YouTube was I heard about Steve Irwin dying on the radio or something, and I was like, oh, I got to check this out. And so I searched it up on YouTube and got some stories there. So
Yeah, they are. Okay. Anyway, but the step with finish up with a happy thought. Your son's going to be a YouTube influencer and he can make enough money to do nice things for his dad when his
well,
dad is
and
retiring.
and his food will be gathered fresh from the greenhouse in the backyard by our family robot, and then it'll be prepared, and we'll just be able to exercise and do things to improve our health and stay healthy and keep our minds active. And yeah, that's one form of utopia, I suppose. The old vision of angels in heaven strumming their harp on the cloud, no cares in the world.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Okay, we'll we'll shut that off so people could say it. They can get on to other YouTube influencers.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that happy note, we'll chat again next week. And yeah, look forward to our next meeting. And I'll try to get someone, I'll try to dig in one of my contacts and see if we can get someone for next week as well.
Okay, hey, sounds good. All right, have a good evening, and we'll talk to you next week.
That sounds good. Bye bye.
Bye.